Hi, I'm Chef Julia, and today I'm going to make some wonderful food for the new year. I'm making some cornbread, black-eyed peas made into Hoppin, and some simmered greens, and I hope you really like these dishes as much as I do. We're going to start with the cornbread, and cornbread is something I always loved, and now that I make whole food, plant-based, no oil food, cornbread is a little trickier to make because, you know, the old-fashioned cornbread had lots of things like eggs and buttermilk and that kind of stuff, but we can't use that, so we're going to use some other things. But a good cornbread starts with, of course, some cornmeal. And I've got a couple of options here. I have a local grist mill makes this really great cornmeal. It's stone ground yellow cornmeal. And then if you can't, if you don't have access to a local grist mill, the Bob's Red Mill or other fine grind or medium grind cornmeals are great. I just look for one, you know, that's just that I've used before that I know I like because they're not all the same. Sometimes cornmeal is so coarsely ground that it's like grains are too big, and I don't really like that. So I'm going to use half cornmeal and half whole wheat pastry flour. So I have this Bob's Red Mill whole wheat pastry flour. And whole wheat pastry flour, I've heard some people say that it's not the easiest thing to find, that it's in short supply in different places. If you can't find it, the substitute is half whole wheat flour and half all-purpose flour. So, but you have to kind of get that all-purpose flour in there because whole wheat flour is not a one-to-one substitute for a whole wheat pastry flour. It's a bit heavier. So our other ingredients for our cornbread are we got the whole wheat pastry flour, the cornmeal. We're going to throw in a tablespoon of baking powder. You have to kind of get a lot of baking powder in this to have it be nice and fluffy and rise up. So we're going to put our whole tablespoon of baking powder in here. And we only need a half a teaspoon of baking soda. So we don't need a lot of that. And I like that because baking soda can sometimes I don't know, create some bitterness. I'm always real careful to make sure it gets mixed up because if you ever get a chunk of baking soda, you know what I mean. It'll be like, oh, what was that? Oh, it stuck to my spoon a little bit. So then we need some salt, 3/4 of a teaspoon, which is a half and a fourth. All right, and these are the dry ingredients. I got my door closed, I had to look over there. I have a dog that barks if I leave the door open. No telling what would happen. I've got two dogs in here watching me, but they're really sleeping. So if you hear snoring, I guarantee you it's the dogs. Okay, so here we whisk our ingredients together. We don't need to get a sifter or anything, just the old, whisk works fine. Just have to make sure we mix it up well. And then we have some wet ingredients, and this part's very simple. Put that aside, you need to get into a bowl. And this is where, it gets a little trickier. Oh, that's a neat loud sound. In, old-fashioned cornbread, you can kind of guess the ingredients. I just remember using lots of butter and eggs and buttermilk and stuff like that. So what we're going to use instead is we're going to take our almond milk, which I've already measured out. And what I've done to the almond milk is I've added a couple tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. And what that did is it created its own version of buttermilk. It kind of, you can't really tell, but it kind of curdles the almond milk. I hate to use the word curdles, but that's exactly what it does. It kind of makes it have like a tart flavor. And then instead of eggs, we're going to have flax eggs. And flax eggs are nothing more than ground flaxseed that has been placed in some water. So the equivalent of one egg is 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed with 3 tablespoons of water, and I made the equivalent of 2. And if you could look at it and see it, it's very egg-like in its consistency. It's almost got a little bit of a, I hate to use the word slimy, but that's kind of what it is. But it works really well as a binder for the cornbread. And then we also put in some applesauce. I have a half a cup here. So the little containers of applesauce, they're not quite half a cup. It's kind of a little bit under, but it's close enough for this recipe. Trust me, I've done this before, and that was plenty. So I'm not worried about it. I need my spoon here. So that's it. We have our wet ingredients. Oh, and some water. We got to pour some water in here. I have half a cup of water already measured out. Okay, so we have our almond milk that has had apple cider vinegar placed in it, applesauce, water, and our flax eggs. We've got them all here. We just have to mix this up, and we're going to add this to our dry ingredients. And remember, the dry ingredients are nothing more than our cornmeal and whole wheat flour and some salt, baking powder, baking soda. Nothing really all out of the ordinary. We just have to mix it up. Oh, I forgot to put some sugar in here. I'm going to add a tablespoon of sugar. Now that's kind of a controversial item. A lot of people following the whole food plant-based way of eating don't use sugar at all. They don't use salt either. But I find that just this tiny little bit of sweetness in the cornbread gives it a good taste. Now I have used maple syrup as well, and you could do that, but I think that made it a little too wet. So to make it less wet, I'm going to use a little organic cane sugar this time, and I think it'll be just fine. And it's a lovely looking batter. It's a little darker than what you would find in traditional cornbread because we're using the whole wheat pastry flour. So it's going to have a little browner look to it than, say, the yellow cornbread that you're used to eating. But the tradition of eating cornbread for the first of the year is because cornbread symbolizes gold. It's supposed to look like gold. So, you know, it doesn't really look gold, but we're going to pretend that it's golden cornbread, even though it's kind of beige cornbread. Okay, and so I have my cast iron skillet. Oh, and let's make sure I have all my ingredients. I was going to add some corn and jalapeno peppers. So I have about 1/3 of a cup of corn. Now ask me, why am I putting corn in this? I just feel like it. It just struck me that I haven't done that in a long time, so you don't have to add corn. And then I have these are pickled jalapenos, or jalapenos, whatever you want to call them. And I've chopped them up kind of small, and they're kind of hot. And I just want to add those because I'm going to eat this cornbread with a bowl of Hoppin black-eyed peas. And I just like the idea of having something different in the cornbread. It just struck me as a fun idea. So there's my cornbread batter, and I'm going to pour it into this, and I'll show this to you. This is a cast iron skillet. It's an old one I've had forever, and I've lined it with some parchment paper because if you don't, then your cornbread is going to stick like crazy to the cast iron skillet, because the old recipe for cornbread that I remember making for my family back when I ate a lot of stuff like butter and eggs, what we did then is we would take the skillet, I've got it a little crooked here, we would put the skillet in the oven and we would put butter in it, like let the butter melt, and then we would put the cornbread batter in. So I don't do that anymore, but so instead we line it with parchment paper. And I'm going to go ahead and get this in the oven. We need to cook it for about 30 minutes. And I wanted to get this going before we started anything else, so perhaps it'll be done by the end of this video. So I'm going to set the timer for 30 minutes. And we will see what happens with our beautiful cornbread. I think you're really going to like it. It's very nice. Get some of my spoons out of the way because we need the cutting board for some chopping. All right, let's get this out of the way. We'll just move that back so I'm not tripping over it. Now we're going to talk about our black-eyed peas. So black-eyed peas, when I was growing up, my father was from the South. He was from North Carolina. And he made a lot of things like pinto beans and black-eyed peas. And especially on New Year's Day, we always had the same thing. We had black-eyed peas, cornbread. They would bake a ham. And you know, he always used stuff. When I was growing up, I didn't pay that much attention to it, but I know he always had fat back, you know, these big chunks of white pork fat with little streaks of lean meat in them and stuff like that. You know, that was the thing that they used where he lived. And so, you know, I didn't realize how good beans and black-eyed peas would taste without that. So I'm going to show you how I make them now, because remember, I make things whole food, plant-based, no oil. So that means we have to make these black-eyed peas without using any oil, without using any meat. And you know, when I first started following this way of eating, I thought, now how am I ever gonna like this food? How's it ever gonna taste as good as the food I used to make? But after about 3.5 years of eating this way, I've really discovered how good food tastes just in its own form. It doesn't have to have a lot of embellishments. And if you eat this way long enough, you start to really appreciate the taste of the food, the taste of the bean, the taste of the black-eyed pea, the taste of the vegetables. And you kind of get over missing the other flavors maybe that you used to like. So I'm not making that up. I really feel that way. I love the way I eat now better than the way I used to eat. And I try to tell my husband that all the time, that if he would just give up his fried food and all the other stuff he eats, he would grow to enjoy my cooking more. But he's doing better. So we're gonna make our black-eyed peas. Now there are very many options with black-eyed peas. I'm gonna turn my skillet on to kind of get it warm. So our options for black-eyed peas are, we could use fresh, and you can buy these in the grocery store now. They're everywhere. They don't take long at all. You don't have to soak them. They cook in, it says 8 to 10 minutes, but I would cook them longer, because I think if you cook them for 8 to 10 minutes, they still have kind of a raw taste. Black-eyed peas, when they're fresh, a lot of times they'll be green. So, you know, if they're green, that's fine. And I had some other information, but black-eyed peas are really beans. They're from the cowpea family. And purple whole peas are part of that family. So purple whole peas are kind of like a black-eyed pea, but they look different. And then you can get them dry. So these are from the grocery store bulk section, and I have taken these and soaked them overnight in some water. I have some over here, and I'll get them in a minute after we get our aromatics simmered. And then I'm a member of the Rancho Gordo Bean Club, and my package is falling apart, which is why it's in this Ziploc bag. You can see them all falling out. They sent these black-eyed peas in their last shipment, in the Bean Club shipment, and they sent some last year, and they are so good. They're kind of funny because the Rancho Gordo black-eyed peas are smaller than the grocery store ones, but they had a really great taste. So if you could ever order Rancho Gordo black-eyed peas, try them, because they're really good. I think they are. Okay, so what we have to do now is, in flavoring the black-eyed peas, we want to have some aromatics, they're called, which is just a fancy word for celery, onions, bell peppers, garlic. And really what this does is it flavors the black-eyed peas, because if we just cook them in water and we're not putting anything else in there, they're going to just be very plain. They're not going to have much character. So we're going to add some various flavorings to get these things going. We're going to cook some onion, celery, green bell pepper, and we'll start with our onion. We're only going to use about half of this onion. You know, every time I see recipes and they say a small onion or a medium onion, and then I think, oh, the onions I buy in Texas are gigantic. I could never use a whole onion in a recipe because it would be way too much onion. You know, there's no way. So I just have my, it's always like half of an onion. And that's what I'm going to do this time. So I just cut it in half, peel it, and then I'm just going to chop it into, you know, like small dice, 1/4 inch. But in order to do that, what I do is I keep it together. I don't cut both ends off, because then I can kind of slice it vertically, and then I can make some cuts. That was horizontally, and then I can make some vertical cuts right here down the lines. The onion kind of has its own little lines. If you follow those lines, it turns out to be about 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to do that and get this onion in the pan. So you see what I've done is I've got my skillet on kind of medium high, and what that does is it gets it nice and hot. So then when I throw my onion in, it's already going to be sizzling, and then I don't have to use any kind of oil or anything. It's not required. It will still brown it, it will still caramelize it, it will still get it good. So the last couple pieces were a little awkward, so I used my knife to cut up any big pieces. So, but for the most part, My onions are all this nice little 1/4-inch dice, that quickly. Okay, and that's what you want to hear. You want to hear your pan sizzling, because that means that it's going to start cooking. You don't want to put your vegetables in a cold pan, because it's never going to do anything. It's just going to sit there and it's going to take forever, and by the time any cooking happens, it's going to really steam it more than anything. We're going to add a celery, just one celery rib or stalk, whatever you want to call it. Cut the ends off. We don't have to peel the celery, although it has kind of a bruised thing, so I will. Some people say that they peel their celery, but I find the kind of organic celery I buy at the grocery store is, really tender, and it doesn't really have that big thick skin on it. But if you get some celery that's older and you can see that it's tough, then go ahead and peel the outside layer off. All you do is just grab one end with your knife and then just kind of peel it. You'll see it'll come right off. It's not hard, but I never do that because my celery tends to be on the tender side. So I'm just going to chop the celery up. You saw what I did. I cut it into strips, and then I just kind of piled the strips up and I get it in the pan quickly. And I haven't done anything. I've just kind of let this sit here. I haven't had to mess with it a lot. I'm going to get something to stir it up with. And it's already starting to brown. I don't know if you probably can't really see it that well, but if you could, it's already forming some nice little brown pieces. And that's where you start getting your flavor. I'm going to turn it down a little bit. I don't want to burn it, so I'll turn it down. And I'm going to add my bell pepper. In this case, Mirepoix is usually the basis for soups and beans, and that's carrot, onion, and celery. But in this recipe, I'm going to use carrot, onion, and bell pepper. And that's kind of what you find in the Louisiana cooking. You'll see more of that, where it's, the Cajun version of Mirepoix, where it's celery, onions, and bell peppers instead of carrots. And we're not going to use the whole bell pepper. We're just going to use half of it. So I cut off the sides, of 2 sides. And the reason for that is because I don't want the bell pepper to overpower the black-eyed peas. The black-eyed peas are on the milder side, and anything you put in there, you're going to be able to taste. And sometimes bell pepper, especially green bell pepper, can be kind of strong, overpowering to me. So that's just my personal taste. If you love bell peppers and think they're wonderful, feel free to put the whole bell pepper in. I cook according to the way I like things to taste, and I'm not that big of a fan of the raw taste of green bell peppers. Now, if it's a red bell pepper, a red bell pepper is just a bell pepper that's been left to ripen longer. Really big pieces here. And I like the taste of red peppers better because I think they have a milder taste. So we'll get that in here. If you have a handy little tool like this, that makes it easier. Half the time I forget to bring this tool into the kitchen when I'm doing my cooking demos, and then I'm scooping everything up with my hands, which works just as well. So don't be afraid to do that. So I've got my vegetables in here. I'm going to put a couple of garlic cloves in here. So I use the whole regular head of garlic. I've just got a couple garlic cloves. I don't want to overpower it with garlic because then it could be like too much. So with the garlic cloves, if you cut off the hard end, you'll see it, it's the hard part of the garlic clove. Just kind of chop that off, get it off your cutting board. And then what you can do is you can take your knife and put your weight on it, and that pretty much eliminates the peel, and then you can cut the garlic a lot easier. But you really have to put your weight on it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Okay, that one worked good too. And then I can just kind of slice the garlic and then chop it. You can get already chopped up garlic, peeled garlic, just peeled already in a bag, or you can get it where it's been peeled and chopped, and all different forms of garlic. You can get crushed garlic and garlic paste, or whatever. I like to just use the fresh garlic because I think it tastes better. Every little step that's taken to process the garlic for you can result in the garlic not being as good as fresh garlic. So that's why I think it's important to just keep it simple. But I know that there's, time-saving things that people like, so I respect that too. I'm going to get something to wash my hands off. And I'm going to wipe my board off a little bit before we go to the next thing. Now what I need to do is I need to cook my onions and vegetables for about 5 minutes. And what I found works really well for me is to put a little bit of vegetable stock or water. In this case, I'm going to put a couple tablespoons of vegetable stock in the pan. And then I'm going to cover it with a lid that I didn't bring in. So I'm going to turn it down to low. Then I'm going to use this lid that doesn't really fit my skillet, but you get the idea. I have a skillet lid that I left in my other room. It's not doing me any good, but that's okay. We're going to turn this on low heat, give it 5 minutes, and then those vegetables will be nice and soft. And in the meantime, I'm going to start preparing the black-eyed peas. So I have my 4.5 quart pot here. And so you might ask, well, why did I do the vegetables in this skillet? Why didn't I just saute my vegetables in my nice cast iron enamel pot? Well, there's a lot more surface area in the 12-inch skillet. So I tend to use the 12-inch skillet just because it has more surface area and I can do it faster. If you wanted to, you could do it in here, but it just takes longer. So I'm just trying to save time. But I do that a lot whenever I'm browning onions and garlic and carrots and stuff for my beans. I do it in the big skillet and then I add it to the pot. And then I go ahead and get my beans sort of boiling while those things are cooking. So I'm not just wasting time. So while that's going, I'm going to take this and I'm going to drain my black-eyed peas. I soaked them overnight. So I did soak them 8 hours. And I put some water in there to cover them by a couple inches. Because remember, these were the grocery store bulk section organic black-eyed peas. And they do need to be soaked. Now the Rancho Gordo black-eyed peas that I'm not going to use today, I'll use them on Friday. They say on theirs you only have to soak them for 2 hours because wherever they get their black-eyed peas, they're fresher. So look on the label if you get some in a package, or with the traditional ones that you buy at the grocery store, it really does take an 8-hour soak. So I'm going to put my vegetables on another burner and let them keep cooking on low. And then I'm going to put this pot here and I'm going to add my liquid to it and start adding seasonings. So what liquid, let me turn this up a little bit. The liquid I'm going to add to this is vegetable stock. All right, it's about 2 cups of vegetable stock with about 1/2 cup of water. Now, I didn't make this vegetable stock. This is store-bought vegetable stock, and I kind of dilute it a little bit because it's got more sodium than I want to use. I do make my own vegetable stock. I happen to like the one at this grocery store a lot, so I'm using that today. But if there's a vegetable stock that you like, just look at the ingredient list on it. I like the one that I'm using because it's very simple and it's just vegetables, but I have bought some that were low sodium that had a lot of stuff in there that made it too sweet, and I didn't care for the sweetness of the vegetable stock. So making my own is really easy. Just carrots and celery and parsley and onions, and I put green lentils in there and water, and it's really good garlic. And so I usually have a bunch of that in my freezer. But not everybody wants to mess around with making their own stock, and I understand that. So, use the store-bought stuff if it's good quality. And I'm really picky about that because there's so many different brands now, and some of them, they're not that good to me. Okay, so we're gonna put a bunch of seasonings in here. So this is what we have to do. The black-eyed peas are not gonna taste like what we remember them to be if we used to eat the old-fashioned grandma's black-eyed peas, if we don't do something to wake them up a little bit. And I've got so many different things here that I'm going to be using to add that little extra umami or that extra little flavor that we need. So we're going to start with liquid smoke. Now, some people don't like liquid smoke. They say they don't believe in it or they don't like it. So just skip it if you don't like it or if you don't have it. But we're only going to use 1/4 of a teaspoon. So, you know, it's not the end of the world if you decide you don't like it or you don't have it. We're going to put in a bay leaf, and then we'll be sure to take it out. Don't eat a bay leaf. They kind of have little sharp ends. You don't want that. 1/2 teaspoon of thyme. And we could use more. Oh, I wanted to tell you this. This is 8 ounces of black-eyed peas. So if you were going to use a whole pound, double everything I'm telling you. But I'm only making 8 ounces, 1/2 pound of black-eyed peas, because I have another pot over here of the black-eyed peas that I've cooked. I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to move my camera over a little bit, and I'll show it to you a little bit later. But you know, I've got the black-eyed peas already made, and I sure don't want to have more black-eyed peas around here at one time. Then already I've got the 1/2 pound over there, and then I'm going to have another 1/2 pound. I told my son, Glenn, I said, come over this afternoon. I've got a bunch of black-eyed peas to give you, because I'm going to make them again on Friday for New Year's Day. I'm going to make the Rancho Gordo ones, so I'm only making 1/2 pound, so double everything if you're making a whole pound. Let's see, 1/2 teaspoon of thyme, and a pound of black-eyed peas is going to be about 6 cups cooked, and that's a good amount to make for New Year's Day if you have people to eat it. Like if it's just you sure don't want to eat a pound of black-eyed peas. It will take you a while to eat it. So this is dry thyme, 1/2 teaspoon, and then my 1/4 of a teaspoon of smoked paprika. Smoked paprika is one of those things that people either love it or they hate it. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. So I tend to use a lot less than other people use, because I think a little goes a long way. It can be overpowering. It could be one of those things where all you taste is the smoked paprika, and that's not what you want. You don't want it to overpower. So I tend to be very, you know, conservative with smoked paprika, and you can always go back and add more, but you can't take it out. This is cayenne pepper, same thing. I'm going to just sprinkle a little in, because I have ruined many a dish with too much cayenne pepper. Just ask my husband. He'll tell you, he'll say, oh, how much cayenne pepper did you put in this? And I'll have put too much in. And my funny story is, in culinary school many years ago, we had to scale, which means we had to, you know, quadruple a recipe for something. I don't even remember what it was, but it had like 1/2 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. So our little group, we quadrupled the cayenne pepper for this pot of whatever it was. It was inedible. Putting that much cayenne pepper in it was not okay. So if you think you have to double everything in your recipe or triple it or quadruple it, wait. And especially if it's a pepper, just add a little bit at a time, because pepper is very overpowering. Same with black pepper. So my recipe calls for 1/4 of a teaspoon of black pepper. My father, who was a food services director for the Army, for a big Army base called, Army post called Fort Ord, California. He was over all their mess hall or all their food services. And he would cook like an Army guy. He would make these big vats of food. And my mother, who was Japanese, who didn't really like a lot of American spices, I could just remember her, even when I was a little kid, saying things like, his name was Zach. She would say, Zach, don't put so much pepper. Don't put too much pepper, because he put way too much black pepper in everything, and it drove her crazy. So be careful with your black pepper. Less is better. More is not good. Same with salt. I'm going to put 1/2 teaspoon of salt in here. I know some of you don't like salt. You don't use salt. You don't need salt. So don't put salt in your black-eyed peas if you don't want salt. It will taste great. It will not taste the same as it would have with salt. But if you're used to not using salt, you'll like it. Then we're going to use 1/2 teaspoon of Taki Umami powder. Taki Umami powder has some sodium in it, but it's made from shiitake mushrooms, and you know, it adds that flavor you get from meat. So when people eat things, and I'm only putting 1/2 teaspoon in, when people are used to the taste of their bacon or ham or meat in their beans or food, if you put the umami powder or the Taki mushroom powder, it really boosts the flavor of that dish. Trader Joe's makes something called mushroom umami. I'm going to turn my vegetables off because I know they're done. They've been doing great. Okay, so I've got the Trader Joe's mushroom powder as well. And when I made my test recipe, I put a little 1/4 of a teaspoon of this in there, and that made it taste really good. The Trader Joe's version has a little ground mustard seed, porcini mushroom, white mushroom powder, red pepper, black pepper, dried thyme. So it has very similar seasonings in it. So we've got all these different spices in the black-eyed peas, and now we're going to add our aromatics, our vegetables. So I have them here in this skillet, and I'm going to make sure that burner's off before I touch it. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to transfer these to my soup pot or my bean pot here. See how many minutes we have. Oh, we're getting down to the last 7 minutes of our delicious cornbread, so that's great. And then all I do is I mix these vegetables in with my black-eyed peas, and then we just simmer this for not quite an hour. Bring it to a boil, and it's already boiling. It's been cooking while I've been talking, and now all we have to do is simmer it. So I'm going to put it on a burner on the back here because I need the space over here, and then we'll get back to it a little bit later. So I'm just going to move it over here out of my way because I'm going to need my skillet again, believe it or not. I'm going to get this on low, put the lid on it, and I'm going to take a breath and take a sip of tea. Life is too short to be stressed out, so I have to calm myself down a little bit and drink some green tea. All right, so our next thing we're going to make some greens, because that was another thing that was a very traditional way to eat New Year's food, was to make some black-eyed peas, greens, and cornbread. So we're going to put some greens in our dish as well. We're going to make it Hoppin, which has greens in it, but we don't have to put greens in our Hoppin if we have a side dish of greens. So we're just going to make a side dish of greens. Why not? It's going to be good, and I have the privilege of having greens available in my own backyard. Let me get my recipe. The recipe for my simmered greens is in one of my ebooks. I have it printed out, but it's a real ebook. It's 50 recipes in 50 days of Facebook Live videos. And I have a recipe in here for plant-based grits with cheese sauce, plant sausage, and greens. This is a really good recipe because I make a sausage out of oatmeal and brown rice. Serve it with grits and greens. Oh, it's like a, you know, when you go plant-based and you don't eat bacon and eggs anymore, I don't really miss that, but I miss the Sunday morning kind of special breakfast, you know, where you get a big plate of hot food and eat it with toast or whatever. I kind of miss that. So that, you know, grits and plant cheese sauce and stuff kind of takes the place of that. So I've got to get my greens, and I want to show them to you. I went out this morning and picked all the collard greens I had, which I didn't have a huge amount of collard greens, but I did have a lot of Swiss chard, and I have a lot of kale, different kinds of lacinato kale in the garden. And so I cut some up already so that it wouldn't take forever for me to do it for you. But I'm going to show you how easy it is to cut these up. What I've done, and this is mostly Swiss chard here because I ran out of collard greens, is what you do is you take the leaf, whatever it is, collard greens or Swiss chard, and you get the stem out, but you don't have to get the whole stem out, just get the tough part of the stem out. Because, you know, you could use the rest of it. Why waste it? And the same with the collard green. If you take your collard green, you don't have to strip the whole thing off because the tough part of the stem is the lower part. And if you just take that out, then you have, excuse me, you have a tender part. And so then we have it all stacked up here. You stack up all your greens. And then the easiest way to cut them is you just roll them up. The analogy that I always heard was like a cigar. It looks like a big cigar, a plant cigar. I'm gonna turn this heat down a little. And then we can slice them thin into like ribbons, and then they cook a lot faster if they're sliced, yeah, not super thin, but you know what I mean. And if they're really big greens, then I kind of like to cut them the other way too. Like I'll run the knife down like this, so they're not so big. And that's it. Then I have this nice, and it's faster that way too. So I've done that with some of my other collard greens and, you know, kale and whatever. So I've got this beautiful bowl of greens, and they're ready to go. But before we put the greens in, we have to put some of the other ingredients in. Oh, I can smell the cornbread. Oh my goodness, it smells wonderful. Okay, so I'm sure you can guess that we have to start with an onion. Like everything else, we're gonna start our greens with probably just 1/4 of an onion. We don't even need 1/2. I'm gonna make some room over here for the other ingredients. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to cut it horizontally about 3 times. This is a really big onion, and I'm gonna cut it vertically. But I'm only gonna use this much of the onion. So it's like 1/4 of the onion. And then I'm just gonna cut it. And again, that just chops it into these nice 1/4-inch pieces. Simple as that. Try not to let it slip. Keep your hands out of the way, your fingertips. Because if you hold your vegetable like that, it's an easy way to get your finger cut. Hasn't happened to me yet, but I've seen it happen. All right, so we're gonna throw our onions in the pan because we need some flavor. We need something in here. We're gonna have onion, a garlic clove, just 1 garlic clove. Okay, I think I'm down to the last minute. Remember, you cut the hard end off, smash it, you hear that? The sound of the garlic kind of coming apart, and we cut it. Just rough chop it, doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have a tool. You don't have to have a garlic press. You know, I try to cook with as few tools as possible because what I found is when I'm busy and, you know, I'm in a rush trying to make food, I really don't want to have to go find different tools and dig around in the drawers and say, now where's the tool for this and where's the tool for that? I just get really impatient. I want to make the food and get it done, okay? So then we're going to cook this onion and garlic for a little while and let it cook down. And I'm going to use this opportunity to take a look at my black-eyed peas over here. Oh, they're kind of simmering quite a bit, and then we're going to let them simmer uncovered, okay? So I should have said that earlier, but we're going to let them simmer uncovered for our less than an hour. So they're over there simmering. We'll get back to them here in a few minutes after we get our greens going. So what we do with the onions is like what we did before. Remember that you know, we can't just use a raw tasting onion. So I'm going to be using some stock with my greens. So I'm going to put some of this vegetable stock in here, and I'm going to cover this. Oh, there's my timer. So, oh, we got to get our cornbread out. You've got to see it because it is beautiful. Move this out of the way. I'll let you see it, and then I'm going to set it on this cutting board. Oh, wow. There you go. And what's really good about this cornbread is because we cook it in a cast iron skillet, you know, that makes it cook really nicely. I've tried making it in different other kinds of pans that promise to be really good for making baked goods like non-stick loaf pans and pie pans, and I've cooked it in a lot of different things. And what I always come back to is good old grandma's cast iron skillet. Now, how do I know this is done? Well, I could take a toothpick and poke it in the middle, and if the toothpick comes out clean, I can tell it's done, but I've made this enough that I know if I press on it and it bounces back, then it's done. I can tell by looking at it that it doesn't have any kind of raw, you know, cake batter, cornbread batter in it. But for the rest of you who haven't made this a zillion times, what I would do is check it at 30 minutes, test it with a toothpick. If the toothpick comes out clean, meaning no batter is on it, it's done. If the toothpick is wet though, what you need to do is put it back in just for like 3 minutes at a time. Don't put it back in for a long time thinking, oh, it needs another 10 minutes, because you'll cook it to death and you won't like it like that, okay? So the cornbread is done. My onions, see, by putting my lid on, that allowed the onions to soften up quite a bit. So now we're gonna add the greens. We just toss in all these greens, and then, you know, we just let them cook. We're gonna add a little seasoning. So seasonings vary, it just depends. You know, different people like different seasonings on their greens. The classic seasoning for the greens is a little vinegar. So we can put just a touch of vinegar in it. I'm not a big fan of strong vinegar tasting things, so I'm just gonna start with a teaspoon. And it's apple cider vinegar, so it's not even a strong taste. If you like it more acidic, you can add more. And we're gonna add a little paprika. That gives it a nice, I think I put the paprika over here. That gives it a nice little color and flavor. And it only needs half a teaspoon of paprika. So not even a lot of paprika. Put that in there, and that does give it a really nice color. A little teaspoon of sugar. You don't have to add sugar. If you're opposed to that, just omit it. I just think it adds a little something to the bitter greens. And I also add a dash of soy sauce, low sodium soy sauce, you know, like a half a teaspoon. And then, remember, I'm half Japanese, so I like soy sauce. Some red chili pepper, red chili flakes. I just eyeball it, but it's like a pinch. All right, and there we have our greens, and then a cup of vegetable stock, because we want them to simmer in the vegetable stock. So we're going to add our vegetable stock in here, and I'm just kind of guessing what a cup is, but you know, I'm a pretty good guesser at that. That's about a cup. We could add more later if we wanted to. But I just want you to see that, you know, what this does is this wilts the greens down. There's this nice smell coming from the vinegar, from the onions, the garlic. You know, everything has made it have some really good flavors. And we used to cook this, you know, you ask, well, how long do you cook these greens? Well, different people have different preferences when it comes to greens. Some people like their greens, you know, very lightly simmered, almost, you know, what you might think is too raw. I like them simmered for a few minutes, depending on the greens. In my recipe, it says cook for 5 minutes or longer. But remember, I picked the greens out of my garden this morning, so they're very, I guess they're really fresh. They have a very fresh taste to them. They're not hard. They haven't been sitting on a grocery store shelf. They just came right out of the garden. And I find that the freshly picked greens take very little time at all. Okay, so I want to show you, I'm going to put the greens on the back burner over here. And I'm going to show you our two things. The black-eyed peas that I started just very short time ago. We started this video, and those black-eyed peas have already cooked so nicely. I think you can see they're already giving me a steam bath. And so those will be done in our hour time, less than an hour time. So I'm going to put those back here again. But you don't want to cook them on a high heat, okay? So make sure that whatever heat you're cooking your black-eyed peas on, you know, they're not boiling away, because you want them to be, they should be simmering. And then I'm going to get my greens on this back burner over here. Trying to juggle all these things is a little complicated. Bear with me. Okay, so these are the black-eyed peas that I made before, and they're already done. So they're perfectly tender. They have developed this beautiful broth, and if you could taste this broth, I think you would find it to be very pleasant. It has all this deep flavor. Turned it down low. It has a really deep flavor. It's not too salty, but it has some kind of, you know, seasoning from the different things we put in there. Remember all the spices we put in there? So good. So what we have to do is we have to construct our Hoppin John. So here's what we're gonna do. Oh, one thing that I didn't add, sorry about this, I add a tablespoon of tomato paste to the beans, to the black-eyed peas, and I forgot to put that in. So I just use these tubes. So I went ahead and put that in. And if you want, you could add tomatoes, canned tomatoes. I did not put canned tomatoes in mine because I just didn't want to, but we could have put these fire roasted tomatoes in our black-eyed peas, just a half a cup, and mash them down so they're not big chunks of tomato. I did not do that this time because I'm not that big of a fan of putting tomatoes in the black-eyed peas. And I can see our greens over here are simmering away and they're cooking down nicely, and they look so pretty. So the greens symbolize money, okay? The black-eyed peas symbolize prosperity, the greens symbolize money, and the cornbread symbolizes gold. So that's why we have to have those food on New Year's Day, have these particular foods. So I'm gonna make our little bowl of Hoppin John. And Hoppin John is really just rice or quinoa, some kind of grain with black-eyed peas on top and some kind of, you know, peppers and onions on top of that. So I've got some brown rice, and I made the brown rice, I call it pasta style, where I take a big pot of boiling water, I put the brown rice in it and just let it bubble in all this water for 30 minutes. Take it out, put it through a colander, add it back to the empty pot, put the lid on it, and let it steam for 10 minutes. And then I have this beautiful, fluffy brown rice. Turns out perfect every time. You don't get that sticky, kind of bad texture to the rice that people always complain about with brown rice. They'll say, oh, my brown rice is gummy, or you know, there's something about it that they don't like. Well, it's because they're cooking it in the Instant Pot or something, and it just has a strange texture. So I'm only going to use maybe half a cup of my brown rice, and I'm going to turn my greens down because I could see they're simmering away. And so I'm going to cover this with this delicious black-eyed peas, and I like to put the juice in there. I love the broth of the black-eyed peas. It's so flavorful. Doesn't that look good? And then we're going to dress it up with, where did I put my, here, over here, sorry about that. We could put things like, you know, chopped up jalapenos, but I'm going to put a scallion, and I have another form of heat that I'm going to use. I'm going to, first I'm going to cut the scallions in little diagonal pieces, really thin, because that's the way I like it. And it makes it look really pretty. I'm all about, you know, your food should look really appetizing, because I don't need all that. So I have that color, I have the pretty green, and then I have this nice monk sauce. It's from an abbey in Arkansas called Subiaco Abbey, and they make it there, the monks make it. And you have to order it, mail order it. I'm sure they sell it in that local area, but my husband got it for me, and I was so happy. And it has a very smoky, it's from smoked habanero, so it has a real smoky, delicious flavor. Okay, so here we have our delicious black-eyed peas, and then I'm gonna get a plate so we can have our black-eyed peas, but then we have to have some of our greens, and the greens are beautiful. Just in that short of a period of time, you could see how they have cooked and softened, and they still retain their pretty color, but that you could tell they're cooked. They're not overcooked, but they're not undercooked. They're not raw, and that's what you want. You don't want to make a mess. Put that back in. So we have our beautiful greens. I'm going to turn the heat off on those. And then, last but not least, let's cut a piece of cornbread. So I'm just going to go back here, let my knife off a little bit. I don't think we want garlic on our cornbread. And since it's not sticking to anything, since we have parchment paper, it is a little hot. It's kind of sticking to the parchment paper. It's maybe a little hot to get out right now, but I'm trying. Should have let it cool a little bit longer. Ah. All right, we may not be getting the cornbread out right now. I'm gonna have to get a spatula, everybody. Forgive me for leaving the room. It was just not working to try to get it out with my hand. Okay, so my cornbread needs more time to set up because it's a little crumbly, but that's okay because in my household, a lot of times, that doesn't look very good. A lot of times they would take the cornbread and dip it into the black-eyed peas or the beans, so it's okay. So there you have it. There's our delicious cornbread with greens, and the star of the show is the Hoppin' John or the black-eyed peas. And this is gonna be my New Year's Day dinner. And when I'm eating it, I'll be remembering my family, my father who loved to make this meal his own way. And the fact that we used to eat this every January 1st when I was growing up. I've made it for my family, not exactly like this, but they're kind of getting used to it. So I hope you make this meal, and if you do, leave information about how yours turned out in the notes here. And thank you very much for watching this today.